Magne Mostad, Professor of Economics at the Department of Economics at Chicago University. Your research about disability insurance shows that, among other things, that disability take-up spills over within the family. Can you please tell me about your most important findings from that study?
So what we show in our paper is that if the parent is assigned to a strict judge versus lenient judge, they are much more likely to get DI if they're assigned to a strict judge. But not only that, but also their kids are much more likely to get on the program. It sort of shows how participation in modern generation of welfare causes participation in the next generation. And importantly, this is not because parents and kids tend to have the same health or work capacity. It's really because of participation itself. So there's a causal link between parents' participation and kids' participation. And what that means is if you have a policy change in the system that affects the parents, it's not only going to have immediate effects on the parents, it's also going to spill over to the kids 20 years later or 30 years later. So the upside of this is that any reform of the system might be very effective because it's going to have both the indirect and direct effects, sort of magnifying those immediate impacts. At the same time, it says that if you have an increase in participation among the parents, it might sort of be reinforced over time for the kids, making the problem even bigger, or at least from the taxpayer's point of view.
Another paper you have is on incentivizing these disability claimants to return to work. So could you please just describe a little bit about the reform you investigated and what the consequences was for the disability insurees?
So in that paper, we asked the question, what happens if we allow people on disability insurance to keep some of the benefits if they return to work? So in that case, we have this something like a local experiment in Norway, allowing some people to keep their benefits and other people don't. And what we see is that because it's a local experiment, these are the same type of people. But the only difference is that some of them are allowed to keep the benefits, while other people are not allowed to keep the benefits if they return to work. And we actually find that if we make work pay for people on disability insurance, a lot of them do return. And especially a lot of young disability insurance applicants do return to work, and they do work quite a bit. And from a public finance point of view, they work so much that the increased tax payment actually offset the increase in benefits. So that's sort of suggesting that there's quite a bit of work capacity, even among people who are on permanent disability insurance, at least in the Norwegian setting. And we see sort of similar findings from other countries, suggesting that today, at least for part of the population on disability insurance, a lot of them have some work capacity, and if you do incentivize them, they are going to work more.
So the disability insurance is also, of course, an insurance. How does these reforms influence the welfare or the consumption of the insurees? Is it an important channel for their welfare?
So this is the hardest question. So I think it's quite a lot of evidence now showing how it may affect the participation rates if you change the policy, or how it might affect the labor supply of these people. The hardest thing is trying to put a number of how valuable is this insurance. So we have one project trying to do something about that. It's not the final answer, but I think we're making some progress. And in that paper, first we're using the same sort of idea where we randomly assign different cases to different judges, and looking at the effect of being assigned to a strict judge versus a lenient judge. We can look at the effect of applicants on who are allowed disability insurance because of a lenient judge, on their subsequent earnings, but also their spouse's earnings, total family income, consumption, and so on and so forth. What we find is that, especially for single people, being denied disability insurance is very costly. They see a big drop in family income and a big drop in consumption. For married people, it's much less of a drop in income and consumption. And the reason is that if you don't get disability insurance, your spouse starts to work more, on average. And that's going to take some of the income hit and some of the consumption hit. So that sort of suggests, I think, illustrates the importance of thinking of the extent to which disability insurance crowds out or crowd in different types of other insurance, and in this case, family insurance. So this is an example of how disability insurance is partly replacing the insurance that would have taken place in the family. So the hard question then is, how costly is it for the spouse to start working more? So to get at that question, we try to estimate a model to get the cost of effort for these people. So this is more speculative. What we find then is that it seems that self-insurance through labor supply is not that costly for the spouse, and therefore married people have a relatively low willingness to pay, relatively low value of disability insurance. While singles who don't have the opportunity of self-insurance through the spouse have a very high willingness to pay. But clearly this is not the final answer. I think it's an important sort of agenda going forward to try to actually think about the insurance aspect of these social insurance programs.
All right, so taking one step back, could you say something about the trends in disability insurance in general in developed countries?
So it varies a bit from country to country, but the general trend has been that we see a very large increase in the fraction of the working age population on disability insurance. If I remember the numbers correctly, Norway went from 2% in 1960 to 10% today. In the US, it went from about 1% in the 60s to I think nearly 6% now. UK is close to 7%. Sweden, I just learned, was close to 10%, but then it dropped down to 6-7% after the reform. The general is the biggest program in most developed countries when it comes to the working age population, both when it comes to participation and spending. And that's been sort of fueling a debate about what we should do with the program. Should we reform it? Should we make the screening tougher? Should we incentivize people more? And that's sort of the key motivation for our research on this topic.
All right, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.